Dust swirled across the Texas plains, wrapping the small frontier town in a haze of gold and grit. The sun hung low, a red ember sinking behind the distant hills. In the middle of the street, a woman stumbled, her hands bound, her dress torn, her face streaked with tears and dust. The townsfolk watched from their porches, whispering her name like a curse. Behind her, two little boys, no older than 6, clung to each other, sobbing. As the sheriff's men dragged the woman forward, one of the twins broke free, running toward her, crying out in a trembling voice, "We'll ask Daddy to marry you." The crowd froze. The wind stopped. In that moment, no one knew whether to pity her or condemn her. A lone cowboy stood at the edge of town, hat pulled low, watching. He knew the widow, Clara Mae, and he knew there was more to her story than gossip and grief. But in a place where law rode slow and rumors rode fast, innocence was a fragile thing. Who was Clara Mae? Why had she been accused of murdering her own husband, a man once called the kindest rancher in Texas? And what secret did her family hide beneath the dry creek bed where he was found? Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Because tonight, we ride into a story where love, guilt, and justice all wear the same face. The sun burned low over the Texas plains, painting the horizon in shades of rust and gold. The small cattle town of Red Rock Crossing sat like a forgotten outpost between miles of empty prairie and endless sky. Wooden storefronts leaned against the wind, and every door creaked like it had something to confess. Here, law came not from books, but from the barrel of a Colt, and justice often rode on rumor more than fact. Into this brittle peace walked Clara Mae, the rancher's widow. Once, she'd been known for her soft laugh and kind eyes, the sort that made even rough cowhands tip their hats. But ever since her husband, Samuel Mae, had been found dead by the creek behind their land, a single gunshot ending a life once full of promise, that laughter had turned to silence. The town whispered. In the saloon, over whiskey and smoke, they said she'd done it for the ranch, for the land Samuel had fought to keep during years of drought. Others murmured darker things, that she'd fallen for another man, a drifter who came through weeks before the murder. Each retelling made her guilt sound more certain, though no one had proof, only talk, passed from porch to porch like wildfire. Sheriff Ethan Cole had known Samuel for years, they'd ridden cattle trails together in their youth. Now, he stood between a town baying for justice and a woman he wasn't sure was guilty. Every clue seemed to twist back on itself, footprints washed away by the creek, a missing revolver, a letter found half-burned in the fireplace. And through it all, Clara stood silent, not pleading, not weeping, just waiting, as if she already knew how this would end. By dusk, when the dust settled over Red Rock, every face in town had chosen a side. Some pitied the widow. Others wanted her to hang. But no one truly knew the truth, and in a place where gossip ruled stronger than law, that was often enough to seal a person's fate. Eli Carter wasn't the kind of man who drew attention. He spoke little, worked hard, and carried the kind of sadness only men of the West understood, the kind that didn't need explaining. Before Clara Mae's husband was shot, Eli had worked their land, mending fences, tending cattle, and earning the quiet trust of the family. After the funeral, when the house felt emptier than the prairie sky, Eli stayed, not out of duty, but because someone needed to. He fixed what was broken, brought water from the well, and made sure the two little boys, Thomas and Luke, had someone to look up to. The twins adored him. They'd race to greet him whenever his boots hit the porch, yelling, "Uncle Eli," as if the world was still whole. To them, he was safety in a world that no longer made sense. To Clara, he was kindness, something she hadn't felt since her husband's laughter faded from the halls. But in a town where gossip spread faster than wildfire, kindness was mistaken for something else. Folks began whispering, saying Eli came around too often, that the widow's tears had dried too quickly. In a place ruled by suspicion, a woman's reputation was as fragile as glass. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned gold, Eli sat with the boys on the porch. They were asking about heaven, about their father. Clara, standing by the door, listened quietly as one of the twins said something that froze her heart. "When we see Daddy again, we'll ask him to marry you to Uncle Eli, so you won't be lonely anymore." It was innocent, pure, the way only children could mean it. But words like that, overheard by the wrong ears, could set a whole town ablaze. By morning, the whispers had become stories. By noon, they'd become accusations. Now, Clara Mae was not just a grieving widow, she was the talk of Red Rock. People said she'd taken her husband's hired hand into her arms before the ground over her husband's grave had settled. And Eli? They said he was more than a ranch hand now, they said he was the reason her husband was dead. The truth was far simpler, and far sadder. But out here, truth didn't matter as much as the story people chose to believe. It began with a whisper, and in towns like Dry Creek, whispers spread faster than wildfire. One late afternoon, a drunken ranch hand stumbled into the saloon, face red from whiskey and sun. He slammed his cup down and swore before the whole bar that he'd seen Clara Mae down by the creek, digging up the earth like she was hiding a sin. No one asked how much he'd been drinking, or whether he might have seen a coyote hole instead. By sundown, the rumor had turned into a noose of its own kind, a rumor that strangled reason. By the time the sheriff heard the story, half the town was already marching toward Clara's small ranch with torches, pitchforks, and righteous fury. They weren't looking for truth anymore, they were looking for blood. Inside her modest cabin, Clara was bathing her twins when the sound of boots and shouts reached her window. The glow of fire flickered against the walls, and she froze, her heart beating like a trapped bird. "Stay inside," she whispered to her children. "Don't open the door." But before she could even reach for her shawl, the door burst open. Rough hands grabbed her, pulling her out into the night air thick with dust and anger. "Tell us what you buried, widow," one man roared. "Your husband's body wasn't enough?" Clara fell to her knees, choking on dust. "I buried a calf that died in the storm." "That's all," she cried. But her words were drowned beneath the mob's shouting. They dragged her through the street, the same street she once walked proudly beside her husband. Now, her hair tangled with dirt, her dress torn, her skin scraped raw against the ground. Sheriff Tom Harlan stood on the edge of the chaos, his hand hovering near his revolver. He'd known Clara's husband. Known Eli, too. Deep down, he doubted every word of the accusation. But looking at the crowd, men he'd drunk with, women who whispered prayers while demanding justice, his voice failed him. "Sheriff, do your job," someone barked. "We ain't letting a murderess walk free." And that's when Eli Carter appeared. He stumbled from the edge of the crowd, bruised from a fight earlier that day, his hat lost somewhere in the dust. "Stop this," he shouted, his voice cracking with rage. "You touch her again, and you'll have to go through me." The men sneered. The widow's cowboy come to save her honor? Before Eli could reach Clara, a rancher struck him across the face with a rifle butt. He fell hard, blood streaking his cheek, but he still tried to crawl toward her, his voice hoarse as he called her name. And through it all, the twins screamed from the porch. "Mama! Mama, please!" Their cries pierced through the chaos, two small voices trembling against the roar of vengeance. For a heartbeat, the sheriff froze. His hand gripped the gun tighter, his conscience pulling him in two directions, between the mob's hunger and the truth he wasn't brave enough to face. Then, over the shouts and the firelight, one of the twins cried out, "We'll ask Daddy to marry you when we see him in heaven." The crowd fell silent. The words, innocent, pure, and heartbreakingly confused, sliced through the noise like a blade. Clara collapsed in the dirt, sobbing. Eli's chest heaved as he lifted his head, eyes glistening with fury and pain. And for the first time, Sheriff Harlan saw the madness for what it was, not justice, but cruelty. He fired a single shot into the air. The echo rolled through the valley like thunder. "That's enough," he said, voice low but unshakable. "Ain't no justice in dragging a mother through the dirt." The crowd wavered, shame creeping in where fury once burned. The torches dimmed. The hands loosened. And as Clara clung to her children, Eli knelt beside her, his blood mixing with the dust. The sheriff turned away, his badge feeling heavier than iron. In Dry Creek, justice had always come by the gun, but that night, mercy finally took its turn. The sound of shouting still echoed through town as Eli Carter galloped into the night, the cold wind biting at his face. He didn't wait for permission, nor did he care that the sheriff's warning voice faded behind him. Clara's words, her terrified eyes, replayed in his mind. "I didn't do it, Eli, please, you have to believe me." He followed the moonlight along the dirt trail to the old creek, the same spot where Clara's husband had been found dead weeks earlier. The water shimmered faintly under the stars, its current whispering secrets to the wind. Eli dismounted, tying his horse to a tree, and stepped into the soft mud. The air smelled of rain and sorrow. Then he saw a patch of disturbed earth, half hidden beneath the tall grass. Kneeling, Eli brushed away the dirt with his bare hands until his fingers hit wood. A small box, weathered, hand-carved, the initials JM etched on the lid. He opened it carefully, expecting stolen jewelry, maybe money. But inside was something far heavier. A revolver. And beside it, a folded letter stained with dried blood. Eli's heart pounded. He unfolded the paper, the edges crackling in his trembling hands. The handwriting was shaky, but clear. It was from John Mae, Clara's husband. If you are reading this, I am gone. I stole from men who will never forgive. I took their gold off a train near San Angelo, and now they're hunting me. If they find me, they'll hang my wife as my accomplice and damn our sons' names forever. I can't let that happen. Better they think me dead by bandits than by guilt. Eli's throat tightened. The letter went on. John had confessed that the night before his death, he buried the revolver in the letter by the creek, intending to turn himself in, but couldn't bear the shame it would bring to his family. He took his own life instead. Clara must have found the box later. She hadn't buried treasure, she'd buried the truth. Eli clenched the letter in his fist. Everything made sense now, her fear, her silence, her refusal to defend herself. She had chosen disgrace over destroying her husband's memory. She had carried the weight of his sin alone. He mounted his horse, spurring it toward town. The wind howled, carrying dust and guilt behind him. "Hold on, Clara," he whispered. "I'm coming." By the time he reached the town square, dawn had begun to color the horizon in pale pink and gold. The torches were still burning low, smoke curling into the cold air. The mob had scattered, but the damage was done. Clara lay in the dirt, her dress torn, her face bruised but breathing barely. The twins clung to her, sobbing. Eli dismounted and ran to her side, dropping the box beside her. He shouted for the sheriff, waving the blood-stained letter. The truth spilled out of him like a broken dam, the robbery, the confession, the sacrifice. The crowd stood frozen. The sheriff took the letter, reading in silence. When he finally looked up, his expression was hollow. "My God," he muttered. She was protecting him. But the words came too late. As the morning light fell over the town, the truth hung heavier than any noose. Clara's eyes fluttered open for a moment, enough to see Eli kneeling beside her, the twins safe in his arms. A faint smile crossed her lips before she slipped into silence. Eli bowed his head, the letter pressed to his chest. The truth had been found, but redemption had come too late. The town square had gone silent, the kind of silence that only comes after too much shouting, too much hate. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dust. Sheriff Cole stood at the center, the crumpled, blood-stained letter trembling in his weathered hands. His voice broke the stillness as he began to read, slow, heavy, every word cutting through the air like a blade. "If you are reading this, I am gone. I stole from men who will never forgive." The townspeople listened, heads bowed, as the truth unfolded: the train robbery, the guilt, the desperate act of a man who had chosen death over disgrace. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eyes that had once burned with fury now filled with shame. When the sheriff reached the final line, "Better they think me dead by bandits than by guilt," he lowered the letter, his voice hollow. "She was innocent," he said quietly. "All along." Eli knelt beside Clara, his hat pressed to his chest. Her face was pale, serene, the faintest trace of peace softening the bruises. The twins clung to her arms, their small hands smeared with dirt and tears. One of them whispered, "Mama, you can wake up now, we know the truth." But she didn't move. The sheriff turned away, guilt weighing heavier than his badge. The townspeople, who only minutes before had demanded blood, now stood frozen, staring at the woman they had condemned without trial. Later that evening, under a blood-red sunset, Eli dug her grave beside her husband's, near the quiet creek where it had all begun. The shovel bit into the dry earth with each aching motion, the metallic scrape echoing across the hills. The twins sat nearby, holding each other, watching silently. When the last clump of earth was laid, Eli placed a simple wooden cross at her head. He carved the words himself with his knife. She kept his secret and his children safe. As the wind swept across the plains, the town of Red Hollow fell silent once more. No one spoke of justice that night. Only of sorrow. And somewhere in the distance, the cry of a mourning dove carried through the dusk a soft, haunting hymn for the woman who had given everything to protect her family's name. The sun dipped low over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of fire and sorrow. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it the last echoes of a story too late to be set right. The camera drifts over two simple wooden crosses, one for a man who chose death over dishonor, and one for a woman who bore his burden until it crushed her. Dust swirls gently across the graves as the narrator's voice fades in, soft but steady. In the Wild West, truth often rode in too late. Clara Mae's story was buried beneath dust and shame, remembered only by two boys who grew up believing their mama was a saint. Years pass in seconds, the graves weathered, the town faded. But the legend of the widow who never betrayed her husband's name lingers like smoke over the prairie. Eli Carter's silhouette stands at the horizon, hat in hand, watching the sunset. Somewhere behind him, the twins' laughter drifts on the breeze, older now, distant, but still carrying the warmth of her love. The frontier was never just about guns and gold. It was about hearts tested by the cruelty of man and the quiet courage of those who endured it.